Hi, this is Richard White again. Today, this is the second video in the sequence on adding weight to flies. As you can see from the first one here, one of the things I'll be talking about is using beads. In this case, I have a, whoops, let's keep that in focus, zoomed in too far. We have sort of a Euro nymph look with a tungsten bead on a jig hook. But again, beads, something very familiar to people. Most people these days are using tungsten beads, but before that, they were almost all brass beads. Obviously, they add weight to the fly. But as you're going to see from some of the other ones I'm going to show you, you can also use it to flip the fly. In this case, since it's a jig hook, it's going to swim with the hook point in the upper position. The bead isn't really doing a whole lot to change that, but it will definitely make sure it's in this position. And because also it's a very streamlined fly, this would sink really, really rapidly. So bead-head fly is something probably pretty much everyone is familiar with bead-headed flies. So could also bring in sort of a pretty standard nymph with a bead head, but just tied on a regular hook, and that's going to swim, obviously in a more normal position. Now you can also use bead heads on small streamers, and it'll do exactly the same thing. It'll weight your streamer a little bit. Adds a little bit of flash to the streamer. So use them on. Now, the other thing you can do with a bead like that is, instead of using it for the head, many people will put the bead, I'm not sure how well it's going to show up in here, will put the bead on the thorax and use it to bulk out the thorax and add the weight there. You just need to have a little bit of a thread dam in front of your bead to hold it where you want it while you're tying. Now, so bead heads, really common, most people are familiar with them. So I'll move on from bead heads to the fact that you can put beads on almost any part of the hook. Here's one of my favorite approaches. So this is basically a leech fly, and if you notice, the bead here is tied in near the butt. Now, I tie these on hooks these are Daiichi swimming nymph hooks, and they have the advantage of, if you put that bead on the back, the fly will swim in an inverted position. You can just bounce these right along the bottom, so you can tie crayfish imitations, leech imitations, anything you want to fish down near the bottom on these. Woolly buggers, the only thing that's different is you tie it near the butt so that it will flip their fly over. Makes great woolly buggers. So weighting the flies in the back, wonderful, but again, using it not just for weight, but to invert the fly. Now, my favorite thing to do with beads is, I'm generally less concerned with super fast sinking. So I will tie on sorry, let me unzoom that. So I will use glass beads. They're really nice for nymphs. It gives you all the segmentation of the nymph. It'll add weight. Now, these are not going to get it sinking to the bottom, like a stone, like you would with a Euro nymph. But especially if you want something moving in the current, with the current, these work wonderfully well. And because they're beads, they're so simple. You just literally thread them on the hook. Now, your concern with threading them on the hook has to do with the shape of the hook bend and the size of the barb. So certain hooks, you notice this hook has a sharp bend at the beginning. That can be very difficult to get beads around. Also, this particular hook I'm holding has a fairly large barb. You're going to have to mash barbs down, and beads, especially glass beads, sometimes will not go past that barb. So you always want to kind of check out what's going to work for you in advance. So pretty standard things to do with beads, but you can get more creative still with beads. One of my favorite things to do is, again, you'll see that I kind of like unusually shaped hooks. So let me put this in place, and then I'll flip it over for you. So this is a keel hook, and I don't know if anybody even makes these anymore. The closest thing these days are some of the bass worm hooks, which it resembles. But the nice thing about the keel hooks is they are going to swim with the hook point up. They're really good fishing in weeds near the bottom, but I use the beads here to give me the flash of the belly. I can put hot spots on based on the color of beads I use. And you end up with flies that sink fairly well. The weight is distributed fairly evenly along the fly, so it's not tending to swim nose down or nose up. Really handy technique. Now, this I picked up from someone else, and this is using beads below the shank, or above, depending on how you look at it. So in this case, what we have is the beads. Let me zoom in a little bit more on that. The beads are on just a piece of monofilament that's tied in first at the very back of the fly, as though it were facing back. Bring it around, basically thread the beads on. They're free to move, so they'll actually give a little bit of rattle while you're fishing the fly. It doesn't take very many to invert the fly, and in this case I'm also using them to give me the flash of the belly. You can use any color. You can mix glass beads with denser beads, pretty much whatever you like. I kind of think of this as sort of a sling. Very effective for getting your flies to swim the way you want. They'll sink. I've seen them used on streamers like this. I've seen them used on crab imitations. Really nice system, incredibly simple, and because you can thread any kind of bead you want on your monofilament. Now, so beads, 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 beads. Now, the other thing people are probably familiar with is using eyes of whatever sort, dumbbell eyes or bead chain. So if you've ever tied flies for bonefish, bead chain eyes giving you just enough weight to sink one slowly. You can go with various sizes of bead chain eyes. Or you can then go with, and again, always inverted. And then we also have on much larger flies, although you can do these on small flies, is using, instead of bead chain eyes, using dumbbell eyes. On, you can see on a clouser or anything of that sort. Fly swims upside down, doesn't get tangled, adds weight. You can really adjust the weight with the size of the eyes you use, and indeed you can put the eyes in different positions. So for example, here's a bonefish fly where the eyes are tied actually closer to where the actual eyes might be on a little shrimp pattern. And again, it sinks well. They're almost completely weedless. They catch fish. Now, there are other things you could use. There are, of course, cone heads, but to me a cone head is basically you use it the same way you would use a bead head. And then there are all those big heavy helmets that some people use, and I tend to stay away from them. I find them a little hard to, there's so much extra weight, I find them hard to cast. Anyway, so just a quick run through of things you might do with beads to add weight, to flip the flies, and obviously also to add color, to add the appearance of eyes, or the thorax, or hot spots. You can use them for any of them. One of the advantages of the glass beads is they come in so many colors. They don't add as much weight, but you get the you can invert the flies, as well as use them to add color and flash to your flies. I hope that's helpful to people. If you have comments or questions, please feel to drop them down below. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.